John, welcome to the show.
Thank you.
So I'm Phil. I'm a partner at Webisoft. We build custom software and interview experts, subject matter experts in the industries that we're interested in. John, do you want to give a quick introduction of who you are and who you work for?
Sure. I'm the Director of Engineering for Statistics and Control Inc. It's literally the hardest thing to say on a microphone or on the phone in general. But I've been with the company for about 15 years now, and we, like you, are a software development company. We mainly focus in the oil and gas industry, and we have two sides to our business. We essentially are a turbo machinery control company. So that's doing the actual turbine control, steam turbine, gas turbine, compressor control, doing a lot of those aspects of customized control solutions. And then we have a simulation or a desktop advanced process control application. And we actually have a lot of different applications that are associated with that. So we kind of span the entire industry. One of the things that sets us apart from a lot of other people is we normally, most companies tend to focus on one aspect of the oil and gas industry. So they'll focus on upstream, midstream, downstream. We don't like to be bored at all with our life. And so we focus on all three, and we do advanced process control for all three. And a lot of other people like to focus on either like power production, things like that. So we also do that too. And so the way that we do that is we have a simulation. We pretty much simulate just about every single process in the gas and oil industry, from the well all the way to the refinery. And then we're able to do a lot of fun stuff with that, like optimization, scheduling, a lot of data analysis, which is really popular nowadays. So it's pretty much the customer comes to us, they have a problem, they ask us to solve it. We try and solve it with either our turbo machinery control or try and solve it with our advanced process control and see where it goes from there. So it's pretty exciting.
So you guys are big on automation and AI?
Yeah, well, we are essentially when you say somebody is a control engineer, automation is pretty much what they're
Hmm.
doing. And of course, one of the nice things about AI is that it either makes it a lot easier to automate information, or it makes it a lot easier to make things available and kind of make those internal decisions in there. And that's what a lot of what we work on now, especially because a great example is in optimization. When I ask that you go turn off a compressor, or when I ask that you go turn off a gas turbine, that's a pretty big deal and a pretty big process for somebody to send maintenance or support out to somewhere, or somebody to shut that down. And then if they have to worry about bringing it back up or coming back up, then again, there's a lot of things that can go wrong there. So normally they tend to look at you pretty skeptically if you're suggesting to either shut things down or turn them off. And AI helps with implementing, first of all, whether we should shut it down or not, or whether we just need to leave it spinning. What are the pluses and minuses of that? Another thing that it helps with too is if you happen to get stuck in either shutting it down or starting it back up, which normally the startup tends to be a little bit more complicated of a process. The AI can help with knowing, especially my experience in it, and helping them start up and shut down. Because that's the whole purpose of AI, is we're trying to have it gain enough experience to know from certain situations what you're supposed to do in that. And so it makes it to where instead of having an engineer like myself who has 15, 20 years of experience and have seen quite a lot and kind of just know off of experience without communicating that, if I tell a software program, hey, think about this in your decision matrix, and then that helps inform the operators who don't have that experience be able to solve some of those hurdles when it comes to operating a large complex process.
So how does that work exactly? Like, do you have kind of smaller language models that are trained like specifically on your data and that recognize patterns, like you said, like, okay, so if this happens, like it's historically because of Y, for instance.
Yeah, that's a great question. So a great example is, say we put out an optimization, and the optimization says, okay, if we keep everything running, we're going to waste, say for example, $10,000 running this guy. Well, if we want to shut it down, we're going to save $10,000 on a like a per week basis or something like that. So is it worth enough to shut it down? Okay, if we shut it down, what is the reliability that we can start it back up? And so being able to reliably start it back up is another that comes into play in there. And what it can do is it can know, like, okay, well, one of the things that it looks at with the live data is we tried to start the turbine too quickly. So it looks like you tried to accelerate it here. So let's go ahead and back off that, or maybe try and start it up a little bit slower, wait a little bit longer, and go from there. So it just depends, because one of the things that we're constantly trying to do is, you know, people are limited on the amount of sensors that they have out in the field, and that's by far getting better. But then you get thrown with so much data that you don't have a person to be able to go
Yeah.
through it all, able to market. And so that's where you need, we have a lot of decision matrices, and a lot of different smaller language models of just knowing how things are set up. Another great example is even just how a compressor is controlled. So you may have a flow sensor on the back part of a compressor. You may have it in the front of the compressor. You may have a throttling valve there. You may not have a throttling valve. You may have pressure sensor on the beginning, not one on the end. You have a pressure sensor on the end, not on the beginning, and it just depends on kind of the setup that they have. Or you may not even have a pressure sensor at all, and you just have the voltage and amperage that you're running in the motor, and it's just a one-speed electric motor. And so you don't necessarily know. There's different ways to calculate things, the different ways that it's set up. And so it makes for kind of a complex process for starting up, shutting down, and just even continuously operating in there. And so that's normally when we start looking at optimization, it is, I would say that the first one is helping save energy. And safety is obviously the number one main factor. So can everything be run safe? And then reliability is kind of the second most important factor. So safety is king, reliability is queen, and then hopefully saving money after that is kind of afterwards. And so it's able to take a lot of that into account instead of, one of the things that I always tell our customers is, off the shelf. We tend to make customized control solutions, and I hope someday that whatever solution I implemented for X company, I can go and implement it for Y company. In the 15 years that I've been doing this, I've never been able to do that again, just because their process is just slightly different, or there's some slight tweak to it, to where you need to take into account something else. And so one of the nice aspects of especially artificial intelligence and those language models, and especially putting in those decision matrices that we have as part of our optimization, is you can keep adding that and keep relying on the experience that you have with various different starting aspects and the various ways that companies operate, and kind of keep building on that to where you have a very intelligent operator that has a tool that can help them make smarter, better decisions a little bit faster as well.
Yeah. I'm in the same boat, by the way. Like, building custom software is, as much as you try to kind of productize your offering, right? They always want something, a little different, and, custom integrations on this or that. So you could probably, and I assume that's true for you guys as well, as you probably reuse kind of the same core software or core solution, but then there's always a layer of customization on top.
Yeah, absolutely. A great example is we were just doing a pilot with a company here, and it was trying to include both their production wells and a little bit of the gathering system, and kind of a little bit more on the midstream side. Well, they had a nice optimization for their artificial lift, which is great. The biggest problem was is that kept interfering with their midstream stuff and in their gathering stations, where it was they were trying to push out as much oil as possible, which is that's what we tell the optimizer to do, but it
Hmm.
wasn't taking into account the gas system and the flares down there where they were flaring off a lot of gas. So
Mm.
not only did optimization need to try and focus on being able to take that oil produced, but it also needs to know what's happening downstream and take into account the pressures that are happening at the flare, and on the gas side of things, it also needs to know, okay, well, maybe I can take out this much oil, but I can't process this amount of oil, or I can't push through this amount of oil because I have no pipeline for it. So it's really helpful in being able to, on the simulation side, we have our simulator, which is what we start off with, but always on the optimization side, there's always some aspect that tends to be new and different that we have to add in there, or we have to say, oh, we also need to take this into account in order for you to be happy with some of the solutions that are coming out. And sometimes, again, the company wants a unicorn or wants something that really can't you either can't do, or there's pros and cons to operating one way or another, and these are the trade-offs. You can't get both and make everything happy, but it just depends. I get why they're asking it, but sometimes it isn't feasible, and it's nice to know that, like, hey, that's not feasible. So
Hmm. Well, that's kind of why they go to you, is that they want to, like, they don't know, right? They don't know what they don't know. And as a vendor or as a service provider, like, your role is to tell them, yeah, this is not a good idea for X, Y, and Z reasons. So in your role at the company, what takes up most of your day?
what takes up most of my day? Well, since I'm the director and kind of the project manager for a lot of large projects, what takes up a lot of my day is just meetings and making sure that projects are moving on and customers are happy with everything, and then also trying to remove bottlenecks from either my engineers or from companies. So I do a lot of interacting with our customers, as well as I do a lot of interacting with not only our engineers but also our development team. So I'm kind of one of the people in the middle that just goes from, and of course, whenever we have some hurdle or some holdup for some reason, it's never one of any of those departments' faults. It's always somebody else's fault, and so
Mm,
it's a matter of just trying to get everyone on the same page and help out with that. So, as I said, it's one of those that. A lot of times whenever I talk to people about a technical solution, I rarely have any issues with the technical solution. It always tends to be the people element that tends
right.
to be the obstructive or the most counterproductive in everything. So that's what I spend a lot of my day dealing with.
I see. I see the human problem,
It's
so
not
to
a problem.
speak.
It's just human.
Well, it's not a problem for much longer with the machines taking over
That's
any
one of
day
the
now.
nice things. AI doesn't argue with people often, so I appreciate
It
that.
it depends. Some of it, some AI will argue, but by design a little bit. What do you spoke about hurdles before and kind of bottlenecks that you see sometimes in projects. What's one that's a recurring one that you see like almost all the time?
Yeah, one the biggest thing is when we ask customers for information and we think of how, okay, we're going to implement a solution this way. And one of the biggest things is, say for example, a the business side of the company comes to us and says, hey, we want this solution, so let's implement it. And then they tell us that it operates this way, and then we get in front of operators, and operators say, no, we don't operate that way. And so it's being able to try and decipher how they operate and what the best workflow process is with implementing our software, and how the company is going to use it on a daily basis, on a weekly basis, on a monthly basis. And then also being able to try and figure out, because again, a lot of times our customers tend to ask for the sky, and there's no problem that we have from a technical aspect. But again, it's always if you keep adding more functionality and keep adding more functionality, it's a lot easier to break down a lot of complex issues and a lot of other things to go wrong than if you try and make it a little bit simpler and not worry about some of the stuff, for instance. So that's probably the main hurdle that we see in a lot of places. Another hurdle too is just one of the things that's been disappointing in the control industry is, especially with being able for individual machines to talk to each other, having standard protocols, different things like that. We've seen a lot of manufacturers kind of wall their systems off and say, hey, we're not going to talk to you unless you happen to have another module that will allow you to talk out, and that costs you more money. And especially now with people going to a subscription service for everything, instead of paying the one-time license for this thing to run 20, 30 years, they're now paying, about a third of that, but they're paying it every single year, and you have to keep paying that again and again and again. And also, it just gives the opportunity for the license model to go up and up and up and up and up, to where it costs a lot of money to implement some of these fancy solutions. So that's one of the things that I see as a pretty big hurdle, is just knowing what you have and whether or not it can talk to various interfaces and aspects and work with the normal workflow that the company works with.
You work in the oil and gas industry, I guess mostly. What's it? And this could be true, for the industry or for your company in general. But what's an outdated process that you kind of have to work with? A legacy way of doing things that you're stuck with, let's say.
I would say one of the biggest issues is ownership of a certain either product or software is kind of a pain, because the biggest issue is with company, especially with large companies, the
Hmm.
business. it comes to us, and then we give them kind of what they want, but then we also work with operations, and then we give what they want. And it's one of those where everybody has to work with it, and then maybe even engineering is completely different from that process. Each department thinks that it's going to come out of the other department's budget if they like it, and so it's being able to figure out, either how to share that across
Mm,
budgets, and also just for companies in general to have a, okay, let's try this fund. Like, okay, here's a new software. Let's try it. Let's run a pilot and see if we go with that. Because I know that there's a lot of technology out there. There's a lot of software out there. Some of it's really bad, but we've found other people are just so inundated with not wanting to do things differently or not wanting to do things separately that they just get stuck in something that worked 30 years ago. Well, and
mhm.
they're still paying for systems that are 30 years old. And to me, that's a waste of money, because it's one of those things that you're not going to stop either technological process, or you're not going to stop people learning and improving. Another issue, too, that you run into is somebody who's worked with that for 30 years. Well, believe it or not, people like to retire too. And so
Oh,
when
they
they
do?
retire,
I didn't think that was a thing anymore.
it's one of those things that's crazy, but people do like to retire. Well, again, you start losing that operational knowledge
Yeah.
unless they happen to enter it in, or they happen to hire somebody underneath them that works very closely and
Yeah.
can learn from their experience, which we found normally hasn't happened that often as well. And so I think that that's kind of one of the big things that companies, I really wish, would pivot towards, is either an openness or embrace with technology, and having just a general fund of, okay, let's try something new. Do we want to implement it into our operational budget next year? And who do we implement it with? And how do we go about doing that? Versus, well, okay, we have three different companies trying three different things from three different vendors, and we can only choose one. But it's one of those where they haven't figured out, all right, which one do we want to choose from? And everybody likes their own. And so then it's just like, well, we couldn't make a decision. We couldn't provide a budget. And so we'll just go with none.
We'll just
But
go at none. They just default to doing
yeah,
nothing.
we'll
Okay,
just keep doing
interesting.
it the same way that we doing it. So yeah.
Well, so yeah, I heard from other guests. I had a suspicion that was the case, just with our own clients in the space, but it seems like the decision makers in oil and gas specifically, and that's probably true for other industries as well, but they kind of need to see something working, you know, somewhere else before they even consider it. But then what happens is, if no one's, if you have a new project or a new product that's not really tried and tested, that must make it really hard to kind of penetrate the market and get, one yes that will then validate, your solution to others. Has that been your experience as well?
Yes. The again, I think one of the biggest problems is that it's difficult to say that these exact two fields are the same in the oil and gas industry, because again, it's kind of a crapshoot for, and there's depending on what type of field it is, how it's working, how it's operating. There's different hurdles to kind of overcome for those different fields, and so you can't. Again, another thing is, a lot of people think, okay, we implement it in this field, let's go ahead and apply it to this field, and it'll work, and it'll be less time, less engineering hours. And it's one of those of, we tend to run into either some barrier or something where it doesn't happen as quickly or isn't implemented as quickly as they expected. And it's one of those where you almost need to take either a little bit more time or a little bit more critical thinking when implementing it, in order to help make it work and kind of fire right out of the gate. So that's normally one of the reasons why I tend to like a lot of writing in between, of saying, hey, this is what we're going to do. This is how we're going to do it with your system. This is how we expect it to work. This is what you're going to get. Do you agree to that? And that also helps too with expectations, as well as scope creep that starts to come up in those
Mm.
as well. So, and it also helps keep the projects from dragging out long term also.
Have you ever encountered a huge, massive problem at a client that was kind of hidden in plain sight, where you kind of came in and said, like, "Wow, like this is a big problem. You guys need to fix."
It wasn't necessarily, it was a big problem for them, but they didn't know about it. But it was really funny. One of my first successes was, I was on an offshore platform out in the middle of the Indian Ocean, and this platform, they had, I don't know, it was probably like 30 or so wells off the platform. But when they first started it up, they had really high gas pressure in there. And so one of the things that whoever commissioned it just sent 10% of gas to flare. It was just one of those where operations didn't really question it. I don't think that they had an engineer on site, or they had an engineer that was working remotely and just either didn't know or didn't pay attention to it, which, or maybe they didn't even have an engineer at all. That could have been the case too. But it was really funny. The
Is that
first thing that
allowed?
I mean, yes, probably. I didn't see that's the thing is with other countries, you never know.
Right.
But
Okay.
but anyway, one of the first things I did was I just turned off the flare, and that automatically gave them 10% more sales gas. And so they were like, "Oh my god, achievement!" Like I was like, I
Wow.
literally haven't even implemented my solution yet. I just turn this guy off and you guys got more sales gas. So I was able to raise their sales gas by 10%, literally just by knowing that, okay, this was commissioned 30 years ago. You guys don't need to flare 10% anymore. You're fine with pressure, and you can just continue to send it on to sales because again, the wells had been declining and there was less flow, less gas, and less pressure in there. But I would say that was one of the biggest wins that I had when I was younger. And it was one of the easiest solutions that I implemented because they're like, well, we don't care what you really implement. You already helped save us a
Yeah,
whole bunch of money. And I was like, well, that's what I'm here for. So,
that's a good start. So you get, first day, hey guys, have you thought about turning this off? And then all of a sudden, like, yeah, that's a great story. Maybe not applicable to you necessarily, but in the industry in general, where do you think, vendors and generally miss the mark? Where, they try to sell the oil and gas or they try to sell to you and they just don't have the right approach.
yeah, I think one of the biggest issues, and I get this with automation quite a lot, especially with implementing control solutions and implementing advanced process control, is everybody seems to think I'm going to push this magic button and it's going to do everything. And it unfortunately won't. And that's one of the things that you still need people to make sure that the data that's coming in is valid and good. That's one of the things. I mean, we can probably talk an entire another hour on data validation for using models. And then another aspect too is, again, sometimes it works really well, sometimes it doesn't. And not in kind of understanding the why it's suggesting that and what are the drawbacks from it, and being able to understand that aspect. One of the things that I think with AI especially is people just type it in, they go, well, AI said it, and it's like, well, no, that's not the whole purpose of AI. It's a
Yeah.
tool. You're the one who's supposed to use that tool to make your life better, but it doesn't replace you doing that much stuff. I will say, like, entry level stuff, I understand that. If we need to have one work process go to another work process, yes, that can be automated. If we need one document to appear here and not have Jan as the secretary email this document to this other person, that can be automated. But especially in terms of process optimization, process safety, it's important to know why either they're suggesting something, why the machine is suggesting something, or why the computer is saying that, and not blindly trusting it. A lot of people ask too, are you worried that AI is going to take away your job? And I say no. And the main reason why is so again, we're control engineers first. So if I ask an AI to implement a PID solution for, say, for example, a suction pressure for a compressor, well, it'll sit there and give me a nice output for what a PID is. But one of the things that it doesn't think about is, first and foremost, it didn't do it in the time domain. I specifically have to tell it, hey, put it in the time domain because nothing's static in process control. So it does that. Okay, well, it'll do that. And then the next step I ask is, okay, what if it happens to be zero? What if the change in time is zero? Then you're dividing by zero. Well, the computer can't divide by zero. So what do? Well, you have to implement a divide by zero into your code in order to make sure that, but it's things like that that you kind of have to know off the top of your head for making it work correctly, and kind of putting in those guardrails first for, all right, I know we're going to run into this, I know we're going to run into this, so this is how I would program it. And so it's a lot of the machines tend to miss some of those subtle nuances of that, especially, and go from there. Another issue too is, like I was talking about, where maybe the pressure meter or the flow meter is on a different aspect in a compressor system. So does it know that it needs a different calculation for if the flow meter is on the discharge side versus on the suction side? So it's just things like that that I see with artificial intelligence nowadays that it's one of those 15 years of experience. You can kind of, I know what's going on, whereas a computer doesn't know that. So it just depends. That's where I see the errors going, and people taking things blindly instead of knowing what the implications of the actions are, essentially.
I mean, that's true for programming as well, right? And the main reason why AI can't do it is because it's not really trained specifically on that data set, right? It's like a general purpose AI. It's probably too niche to ever get to that point, or it's tough to say if we'll ever get to the point where we need AI to do what you do, for instance.
It's getting
In fact,
better. I can
well, I
definitely,
mean, it's not a technical limitation, right? It's probably at one point going to become a physical limitation where, like, okay, like, you have the right answer, but are you going to actually execute any of what you're saying, right? So you need a physical body to do that, and that's probably like when robots come in. But I'm not sure what the timeline is for that, if at all. But like, so in programming, for instance, like, or in software development, like, obviously everybody at the firm uses AI. Different AI tools, different platforms, whether it's Cursor, OpenAI, or Gemini, or whatever. They all do a decently good job. I think now everybody's pretty hype on Claude, but even Claude has its limitations. But it's going to do like 90% of something pretty well. But then the last part is the crucial part, and it doesn't do that, right?
yeah,
And I don't see that gap being filled anytime soon.
yeah,
And that's where your kind of human in the loop validator, comment from earlier comes in. It's like you kind of always need somebody that knows what he's doing to supervise this and kind of tell AI, how he wants it to be done. I'll tell you that much though, like, maybe like a 20-man project could now be like a 3-man project because of AI, right? So
yeah,
that's where a lot of
absolutely.
the taking jobs comments, come in is, to do the same output, you probably need less people, and
Yeah,
probably will need less people, like, even more, year after year as these things get better.
yeah, we've definitely seen that going on here. Actually, we do a lot of stuff with refineries. And when I first started, a refinery probably had 200 people working at it, operators, engineers, technicians. You needed 200 people to literally operate even a small refinery. And nowadays, it's one of those where, just to say, for example, set it, let it, forget it, and automate it, there's probably maybe 50 people involved. And out of those
Mm,
50 people, it's probably a majority of them are probably literally operators that have to man it no matter what, and so you're never
yeah.
going to lose, say for example, those 20 operators for the different processes that you have to have 24/7. So that's one of those of, we're definitely getting smaller in that. Okay, well, maybe we don't need a specific subject matter expert on site. He can just sit in an office in Houston and he can get data from one refinery, or hey, an operator calls from another refinery, hey, we have this issue, what would you do? And be able to help with that. The biggest problem with that is, again, it starts going to the you start losing the different knowledge of each refinery and why you do something or how to do something, and being able to figure that out. Because another thing that I find that AI is pushing out more is it's pushing out a lot of the younger jobs. And so for somebody like
Hmm.
me who had a great mentor and had a great team of leaders above me that had a lot of experience, and I learned from them, and then I'm able to go and learn from them for 3 or 4 years when I first enter it and be like, all right, I got this now on my own. And then I go and do it by myself. Well, I have that 3 to 4 years of learning of how to do stuff, why to do stuff, and things like that. And I still can go to them and ask, hey, what would you do in this situation? And they have even more leadership. But the problem is okay, you don't need that junior engineer now to do some of the stuff that the senior engineer didn't want to do. The senior engineer has AI and he can take care of that. Well, okay, again, believe it or not, the senior engineer would like to retire. So what do you do now? You don't really have somebody to promote or hire into that senior engineer role. And then that, not see, I say that that it's a bad thing, but that's normally when customers turn to us for consultancy because they don't have somebody in that role now. That's always
Oh,
different.
interesting. Okay, so there's some gaps that are starting to appear, like, within the organizations because they're They rely. Is it because they rely on AI? You think, or it's just they've slowed down hiring?
There's many factors in that. If we're in the oil and gas industry. So when I first started in 2010, it was a beautiful boom. I thoroughly loved it. Gas was sitting at 100, or oil was sitting at
Mm-hmm.
120 a barrel. Everybody was making money hand over fist. It was just like, yeah, this is a really great industry to be in. And then 2015, 2016, we had a recession. Again, it's always one of those of save your pennies, and you never know when you're going to be
Yeah.
replaced. That happened. And so we saw a lot of people, say, for example, my age, that were let go because it's just like, well, we need to cut staff, and the junior people are the ones that cut staff. So, okay, that's fine. It's a recession. Well, when it starts getting back up there, we'll start hiring like crazy. Well, it really hasn't kind of gotten back up there because, again, we had another recession in, say, for example, 2018, 2019, when the Middle East was trying to push, all of the U.S. oil companies out of business through fracking, and they were trying to get it so low to where fracking was too expensive and everybody would declare bankruptcy. Well, we pushed through that, and that was not necessarily a great time. And then we had COVID kind of on top of that afterwards. So it's just more of well, you've now had almost 10 years of not having any new people. And so, what do you do when you have 10 years of not having any new people? Who do you turn to when some of these older people start retiring that they haven't really passed down any knowledge to? So, it's one of those where it starts to get a little bit more interesting. And that's, I think, one of the reasons why AI, especially for the oil and gas industry, has been relied on so heavily, is that it's one of those of sometimes we need people, sometimes we don't, and companies would prefer not to have that gear up, gear down type situation or make it really easy. And by having AI use those tools, then they can get a lot more done with just one person versus having to hire somebody extra. So, but again, the short end of that stick is that they just tend to lose out on the people that have experience and then being able to promote up once other people either leave or retire. So, as I said, it's an interesting issue.
Do you think actually on that topic, do you think AI would be a good solution for the knowledge base aspect of it, where you kind of centralize all your knowledge and data, and so that's going to be your source of truth that will never retire, essentially.
Yes, I do think that it helps. So and we actually implement the same thing in our company, because one of the things, we're a pretty global company, even though we have a small office here, but we're based out of West Des Moines, Iowa, and I have about 10 engineers underneath me right here in West Des Moines, and I have another office in Bulgaria, I have an office in Indonesia, I have an office in Mexico City. So I have offices all over, and I have engineers that work on kind of similar projects. And so one of the things that we build in house here is that knowledge base, because it's one of those that I teach my engineers, whichever ones that join. My first mode of thought is I need to teach them to go out and be able to do things without me right there by their side trying to solve everything. And also, believe it or not, I occasionally like to sleep. And so I don't need
Hmm.
them calling me
Oh, you're
when
one of
they're
those.
I know, when they're 12 hours ahead in Indonesia, and calling me at 3 o'clock in the morning, going, "Hey, we ran into this problem while we're trying to commission something. What can we do?" And giving them solutions. So the whole idea is being able to put that into a knowledge base, essentially. And one of the things that AI has especially helped out with is making the articles a lot easier to write. Because if you've ever worked with engineers, and probably developers too, because I can't get my developers to document anything, they hate documenting stuff. So it's more of like, throw whatever you want into this Word document, send it over to documentation. They'll use Chat GPT, or Claude is a little bit better for writing. So they'll use Claude, and then it'll become this really nice document that can get put into our knowledge base. And then one of the nice things with AI is I can search the knowledge base, and it can find me a couple different articles or answers for the problem that I'm having. And maybe it's not my specific problem, but one of the things is that it gets my engineers going and thinking of like, oh, let's try this, or let's see what this does. And so I try and make that very clear for any issue that they run into in the field. We document it, have specific images of what's going on, and then come back and be able to have a solution for that. And that's one of the things that our customers really like, is a lot of times if they upgrade in software, or they happen to upgrade in their controls, then we have either run into it before, or I don't know, I haven't ran into it. Hang on, let me ask my knowledge base and see if
Very
somebody else
nice.
to it.
Yeah.
And then just the other day, I had somebody upgrading from a control system, and they were upgrading from, say, for example, system 400 to system 500. And they had a particular issue with that system 500, and they asked, hey, you work with system 500 a lot, have you run into this issue? And I was like, well, yes, we ran into it. I just printed out the article, sent it to them, and hooray. And it worked. The same solution worked for them, and hooray, I have another happy customer that they didn't have to call out that company to send an engineer out for an ungodly amount of money. They just asked me, I found an answer really quickly and sent it to them, and it didn't cost them anything. It took me literally about a minute and a half to find the solution and then answer their email, and that was about it. So that's where I think that a lot of the smaller wins come in helping build that up. So, and that's another issue too of like, we run into it a lot because we deal with upgrades for systems with a lot of different customers and a lot of different companies, whereas they're only going to upgrade to this system one time, so that's literally the only time that they will deal with that problem. And is it worth paying a company engineer to come out for $2,500 an hour or a day on site and do that, or is it worth just sending me an email and saying, hey, have you run into this problem? Why, yes, we have. This is how we dealt with it. So
Yeah, and if they have to go onshore, I know that gets pretty expensive. Offshore rather, that gets pretty expensive, right? You need the helicopter and the whole
yep.
setup.
And it's a different pay rate for offshore, and it's more expensive. So yep,
Yeah,
absolutely.
yeah, we found that out because we have a cloud software, and then we have an on-premise version of the same software that we're installing on offshore platforms. And I didn't know that it needed to be validated, by regulators on
Yeah.
site. Like essentially, whatever you build needs to work and be tested at the exact station it's going to be used at. And I think the client told us, it was like, yeah, like every time we do this, it's like $50,000. They're
Yep.
like, holy, okay, I didn't know that. Like we thought we could just like push updates. Nope, that's not how it works. Um, so I guess
It's
expensive really quickly.
It's really funny comparing because we do a little bit in the manufacturing field too,
Hmm.
since we have the IoT stuff and we set up a lot of communication networks and things like that. And it's always really funny where especially in the manufacturing world, if you screw up in the manufacturing world, there's not too much. It's like, oh man, you broke a couple widgets or whatever.
Yeah.
Whereas, unfortunately, in the process world, they tend to have a very established and validated, and the testing for upgrading to push it to production is quite a lot of testing in there. And I think that's one of the things that for us as a company, that's why we've expanded to so many different aspects. Is we started off with just control solutions, and the way that our advanced process control solution was built was we were implementing a large power control solution, and they
Hmm.
said, hey, this factory acceptance testing will go a lot faster if we can just connect a simulator and think of how it is. So we can either go buy one or you can build one. And so we said, okay, we'll build one. And we built it, and it was really nice. They liked it. And they said, okay, well, what we're going to do is we're now also going to make this an operator trainer simulator and kind of go from there. And so they liked it so much for their power production that they implemented it on their gas systems as well. And so that just kind of helped expand how it is. But it's one of those where essentially at some point in time, it'll hopefully be, it makes it a lot easier when it's all in house. It makes it a little bit cheaper when you just have the same system running that's actually running in production that you use for your operator training simulator, that you use for your validation too, especially. But yeah, testing's fun.
A lot of fun. What innovation are you the most excited about for the next year, 2 years?
I would have to say, since we do a lot of simulation, one of the things that I love about innovation is how much computing power individual computers have now. So when we first started off, you had to have a blade server to run simulations. There was no way that you can have a desktop application. You could not buy a powerful enough one. It would never be fast enough, didn't have enough cores, didn't have enough processors. And now you're seeing, I could purchase a 32 core processor or 32 core machine for relatively cheap. It's not going to cost you $5,000 to do, and it'll have everything to run on it. And so I'm especially excited about how quickly we can start having data. And also, data size was a big thing too. We used to have companies complain to us that said, hey, and this is one of the reasons why we made our own database, was they were blowing computers up with saving all their data. And nowadays, you have so much capability to save information that they don't care if the data runs up to a couple of terabytes in a few months. They just don't care about it. And it's really great to not have those limitations or have to deal with those headaches anymore. It's now, okay, well, we can save all this data, but what do we do with all this data? And so it's focusing on the solutions to what do we do with this data, or how do we help make it work better for you, or make it more knowledgeable and make it more information driven and action driven for your operators, so that way bad things don't happen, and you can continue profiting from it and making money. So that's always a fun thing for an engineer, is taking a solution and being able to implement it and see it work pretty successfully in the field.
So I know we're coming up on time here. My last question would be, and feel free to add whatever final thoughts you might have here, but is there anything that kind of keeps you up at night for the future?
My engineers, no. The I would say the biggest thing that I worry about, especially, and again, it helps me as a consultant, but it doesn't necessarily help the US, or it doesn't help companies implement solutions very well, is that people like automation, but one of the things is they start losing people from it, and they start losing that knowledge. And so it's one of
Hmm.
those that the knowledge will go away. And I worry that people, either especially senior engineers, senior operators, won't write down what was successful, what really worked, what you should never do, things like that, to where they had a playbook. Another great example is one of the first projects that I had was doing a control solution for a power plant in South America. And it was one guy that was the main control person for that. And he had a red notebook that had all the controls, all the process, literally all the information that you could think of. Imagine if somebody accidentally took that red notebook and threw it in the trash, and then he died in a car crash the next day.
Yeah.
And so it's things like that that, especially with my company, one of the things, I manage about 40-ish engineers or so, and I have a lot of knowledge. And one of the things that I hope to impart to all of my engineers is that if I happen to die in a fiery car crash tomorrow, they'd be able to help people, and they'd be able to step up and do whatever I could do and whatever I could implement, and implement those same solutions today. So it's, again, the knowledge loss for me is always something that kind of keeps me up at night. And I hope that people continue with, I know it's terrible and horrible to document stuff, but I hope that people keep documenting. I hope that knowledge bases tend to grow, and that answers or solutions tend to be either easier to find, or different processes get adapted a little bit easier to take new technology, take new solutions into account for that. So we'll see. I don't know what keeps you up at night.
Well, now I'm wondering if you're building Agent John,
Kind of.
training an agent on
We want to
on
replicate me
you,
a
yeah,
couple of times. Yeah, absolutely.
clone yourself, because we're getting close to being able to, at least from a knowledge perspective, right? Um, for me, what keeps me up, that's a good, I've never been asked. I'm the host, and no one asked me questions. I am worried a little bit about global stability. I will admit, a lot of things happening, throughout the world, and even North America now, a bit of a friction at times.
Yeah,
Um, and then how that will interface with AI, getting obviously more and more involved, and not being under tight ethical guidelines everywhere, let's say, or wonder how China is approaching it, how Iran's approaching it. How obviously we know that the big companies in the US, but they're not the only ones playing in that field, right? And so it's, but at the same time, like, why worry about what you can't control, right?
yeah, I understand that as well. And another thing too is just, again, you start getting into the morality of AI. And so it's one of those of, okay, say for example, you think that energy is killing our climate, and that we don't want to kill the world. We want to help save the world. Well, what would AI think about of trying to save the world? What's the best way to stop using as much energy? Well, the best way to stop using as much energy is a lot of people happen to die all at once. We won't use it.
Yeah.
But again, from the moralistic point of view, is that a good solution? I don't think too many people would agree on yes. And so it goes back to that. You start implementing solutions that you don't know the reasoning behind or
Mhm.
why, and people just blindly believe it, unfortunately, as well. And so when it's just like, well, we're not talking about huge swaths of population, but if we just get rid of these really high energy users,
Yeah.
then we should be good to go in that. Although it's really funny if AI would do that, because again, a lot of times it's their data servers and data farms that tend to take up quite a
Oh,
lot of
that's going
energy,
to be interesting.
quite
Yeah,
a lot
like
of
they're going to
energy and
basically
resources.
hey, I'm the problem. They're going to realize, oh,
Yeah.
oh no, I'm the reason behind it.
Uh,
Um, John, thank you so much for jumping on. This was great.
yeah, absolutely. If you ever want to talk again, just give me a holler.